was convicted on 34 felony counts for falsifying business records last year, was given a conditional discharge in January this year, just before he took office. And so that has been a sort of key point of contention for the Democrats. But the White House is saying they will press on with this. They're determined in their view to change the situation as regards violent crime in Washington.
Tom Bateman, thank you very much for that reporting.
OK, back to our panellists, Jennifer Carroll and Brett Bruen. Jennifer, we've pointed out the statistics. Overall crime is falling. Violent crime is falling even more. So why is the president doing this? Is it just about, his desire to show his authority over the National Guard? And is it politically motivated because Washington is a pretty liberal city?
It's about bringing law and order and safety for the surrounding areas of our nation's capital. When you are a parent of a young man who was killed by a teenager, and that teenager is now out on probation, that is concerning. When we have congressional staffers that are robbed, carjacked, stabbed, and we have also our congressional members who are in that same predicament, and we have a lot of students that leave from other states to come to Washington, D.C. to see the Smithsonian and the mall and the monuments. And it is, in some areas, not a very safe environment. Mayor Bowser, I commend her for at least working with the administration, because her hands are also tied with the DA, the local DA, and not prosecuting these juveniles that are committing these crimes. And many of these juveniles are being used by the higher-ups of the gangbangers, because they know these juveniles are just going to be able to walk out of the prison.
So that is important to make the point here that the mayor has also addressed some of this crime led by juveniles, as you said, by imposing a curfew for some part of the summer here in Washington. But Brett, do you think that this is going to be something that we end up seeing President Trump then repeat in other cities?
Yeah, and this is already a pattern. We saw what happened in Los Angeles. Again, ostensibly, this effort at law enforcement in Los Angeles was all about the crime, the immigration situation, and yet again there, the statistics just didn't support it. And I think what Trump is doing is trying to find a fight. He is looking at how can, both from a political standpoint, but also, quite frankly, from a security standpoint, he wants to create the justification for doing even more, for going even farther. And that's what's really worrying here. Obviously, there are a lot of constitutional questions, and for viewers overseas, really important to understand, we fought a war of independence so that we did not have soldiers in our streets, so that we did have local control over this. And on top of that, and this is, Sumi, where I really get concerned, is we will see, despite some of those comments about they're going to be in support roles, administrative roles, we may well, I fear, see a situation where you have a soldier who is engaged in open conflict, fighting with civilians on the streets, and that is a very tragic situation here in the U.S.
Brett, thank you very much, you and Jennifer, for your thoughts on that. We will be back after this short break. Stay with us here on The Context on BBC News.
Welcome back to The Context USA with me, Sumi Somaskanda, in Washington.
And me, Anita McVeigh, in London. A U.S. judge rejects a Justice Department request to unseal grand jury testimony from the case against Ghislaine Maxwell, the jailed accomplice of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
But first, the White House says President Trump signed an executive order extending a pause in sharply higher U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports for another 90 days.
Yes, the tariff truce between Beijing and Washington had been set to expire tomorrow, but the Trump administration had hinted that the deadline could be extended further.
The order prevents U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods shooting up to 145% and Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods to 125%, rates that would have resulted in a virtual trade embargo. So let's talk about that with our panel, Jennifer Carroll and Brett Bruen. Jennifer, I'll start with you on this. It seems that President Trump is giving China yet another reprieve here. Do you think that's the right move?
Well, President Trump stated that they're making progress in their negotiating talks with regards to the tariffs and what will be the percent, et cetera. So I think, yes, if they're not there yet, if they're 50% there or 70% there, yes, continue the conversation so that they can come to some agreement as to what will be a fair trade tariff between the two nations.
And Brett, isn't this a recognition that when you're dealing with a country the size of China, and on the other side of the negotiation you have a country the size of the USA, that there are going to be no winners in a tariff war? And actually, in this particular instance, the tariffs just aren't going to work for President Trump or work for America.
Well, certainly it is a demonstration of the limit of Trump's power when it comes to some of these economic moves. That being said, it is truly bizarre that we are giving another 90-day reprieve to Beijing when some of our closest allies, the Canadians, even the Swiss that now face upwards of a 40% tariff on their goods, they're still negotiating with Washington, and yet their goods entering U.S. ports are subject to that higher rate. So there isn't a logic that flows through Trump's trade strategy. And I think at the end of the day, there's been some really interesting reporting, especially going back to Trump's first deal with the Chinese in his first term, where he got this agreement, we're going to buy hundreds of billions of dollars in agricultural goods, and they never did. So I think, observers, the press, need to treat with some caution these big investment figures that Trump loves to trumpet about.
OK, well, let's stay with the subject of the USA and China, because in what's being described as an unprecedented deal, US chip companies NVIDIA and AMD have agreed to pay the US government 15% of their revenues from sales in China in exchange for export licenses allowing them to trade there. In April, the US banned the sale of their AI chips over national security concerns.
Security experts, some of whom served in President Trump's first term, recently wrote to the administration expressing deep concern that NVIDIA's H20 chip could accelerate China's push to be the global leader in AI. Now, critics of this latest development say it looks as though the administration is trading away national security protections for revenue for the Treasury.
Last month, NVIDIA became the first company to be valued at $4 trillion. China has been seeking an easing of restrictions in this sector.
This is what Mr. Trump had to say earlier about NVIDIA's H20 chip and his negotiations with the company's CEO, Jensen Huang.
It's an old chip. China already has it in a different form, different name. So I said, listen, I want 20% if I'm going to approve this for you, for the country, for our country, for the U.S. I don't want it myself. So we negotiate a little deal. So he's selling a essentially old chip that Huawei has a similar chip.
But Mr. Trump didn't rule out a deal with NVIDIA to allow for sales of the next generation advanced chip in China, the Blackwell.
Well, let's go to Atlanta to speak to Peter Harrell, former White House Senior Director for International Economics under President Biden, now at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Peter, it's good to have you with us. What do you make of this agreement?
I mean, it is quite an unprecedented step out of President Trump to charge a sort of revenue-sharing fee in exchange for granting an export control license. It's not something that's really ever been done before, and indeed there's some legal questions about whether this is, in fact, something the Commerce Department legally can do. We've seen a lot of unprecedented things out of President Trump on the trade file over the last 6 or 7 months, and I think we have to add this to the list. I do think there's some real security concerns that this kind of revenue share doesn't address, but maybe we shouldn't have been surprised given the president's history on trade here.
Well, let me ask you about those national security concerns, because we have heard that the U.S. wants to actually curtail China's ability to develop AI at the speed that it has. Do you think that has been traded away for revenue?
So I fear it has been. I mean, Trump is, in that clip you just played of the president, Trump is correct that this is not NVIDIA's leading edge chip. This is a chip that's, 2-3 years old. Trump is wrong, however, that Huawei and other Chinese companies have developed at scale chips as powerful as this one. This is giving China a AI training and AI implementation capability that they do not otherwise have. In exchange for money going to the U.S. government. It's hard to see how paying the 15% to the U.S. government addresses any national security risk that might be associated with, with these chips going to China.
And why would NVIDIA and AMD agree to this? I mean, clearly they see the benefit despite the 15% going to the U.S. government.
Yeah, well, I get why NVIDIA and AMD would agree to this. If you're NVIDIA, you're AMD, since April, you haven't been able to sell these chips at all to China because of the national security export controls that came into play. So now you're looking at this as well. Practically speaking, your choice is you can sell to China and keep 85% of the revenue, or you cannot sell to China, making a kind of rational choice from their perspective. They'd rather get 85% of the revenue than 0% of the revenue that you'd get if you can't sell in China. So I get it from the corporate perspective. But again, from the U.S. government's perspective, you've created this really perverse situation where you've said there is a national security risk, but, as long as you give us 15%, we're okay running that national security risk.
And Peter, what about the precedent this sets? Do you think we could see similar deals made with other companies?
Well, I think that there are certainly a lot of questions that a lot of tech companies have today about, is this going to be some kind of new precedent that if tech companies want to export their advanced technology around the world, they're going to have to give the U.S. government a share. I think there are a lot of those questions today. We'll have to see if that, in fact, plays out, if this is a precedent or if it is a one-off, but there's a lot of nervousness about that. As I said, there are also some legal questions about, is this really legal? Now, let's be realistic. NVIDIA, AMD, they've agreed to this deal. They're not going to turn around and sue tomorrow saying, hey, this deal we just agreed to is illegal. But I do think that if the Trump administration tries to make this a default or more common in export control licenses, you probably are going to see some litigation around whether or not this is actually something the government is allowed to do.
Okay, Peter, great to get your take on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's return to our panel, Jennifer Carroll and Brett Bruen. As our guest was saying, and lots of other people as well, this is unprecedented, quite a turnaround from the previous national security concerns that were cited. What do you think, bottom line, is the motivation here? Is it purely financial?
I think that Trump, quite frankly, sees the world through green-colored glasses, and so everything is a potential money deal. The problem is that, once you give this technology, this know-how over to an adversary, and China is an adversary, that cannot be put back in the toothpaste container. And that's where I think we really are opening ourselves up to a whole lot of vulnerabilities, and at a time when China is increasingly aggressive, both online with their hacks, with stealing American and European intellectual property, but also just in the last 24 hours, we're seeing Chinese Coast Guard vessels slamming into Filipino Coast Guard vessels. I mean, this is the kind of action of an adversary that ought to be met with a firm response from Washington, and instead Trump is pocketing a little bit of money into the Treasury.
Jennifer, what do you think of that argument that it really is a big national security concern that's being swept to the side here for revenue?
Here's the thing that we don't know is what are those additional conversations and agreements that were made with regards to this? We're seeing it as just a financial transaction, but what about if there's a reportability as to how many chips, and if China has to give where those chips are going, and if those chips can be traceable to what it's going in? I think that would be fantastic if we knew that, and if we had that sort of reportability. We don't know what the deal is behind the scenes. All we're seeing is a financial transaction. But if we have a way of tracking it, I think that would be great for the United States.
To be fair, Jennifer, I find it unlikely that China would actually share that information.
Maybe, but who knows what on NVIDIA side, what they would agree to with the U.S. government for that export license.
And Brett, obviously, and we played those two clips, didn't we? President Trump, first of all, saying that the H20 chip was an older model, but then saying that perhaps a deal could be done on the newer model. So he basically countered his own argument there, if he was trying to make an argument about national security no longer being a factor.
Yeah, and the devil really is in the details, and with all due respect to whether it's the trade agreements, the quote-unquote peace deals, or now these deals with NVIDIA, we don't actually have the details on most of them, and that is what is so problematic and concerning for a lot of us, because Trump proclaims peace. He proclaims that he's got a trade deal with Japan, the UK, South Korea, but we actually haven't seen deals. I worked on these deals. I mean, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, had voluminous pages that got into great detail on every aspect of our trading relationship with 40% of the global economy. We haven't seen anything approximating that.
But the detail could be there, as Jennifer suggests, couldn't it? We just haven't seen it.
No, I think this is really important. We are required both by law as well as, quite frankly, just by the position of confidence in which you're entrusted as president. You actually have to reveal these details. And you can't just, blow it off and say, well, there's going to be a secret subchapter. You have to justify that under U.S. law. That isn't the case also with a private company. There can't be a secret deal between NVIDIA and the U.S. government that other companies don't have access to. So, with all due respect to, what may or may not be a backroom deal here, that doesn't work in the U.S. government system. And I think it's important that we insist on both more transparency and more details.
Okay, Brett and Jennifer will be back with both of you in just a moment. We're going to be talking about, yes, again, the Epstein files after a short break around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
He became one of the world's greatest leaders. He changed the course of history. Now, Lech Walesa, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, is coming to North America on his first ever Grand Lecture Tour. Be part of this historic event. Meet the global leader live on stage as he takes you behind the scenes of history's greatest turning points and the greatest challenges of our time. Join the conversation that will shape our future. Register now at historyexplorer.com.
Along the skyline of Dubai, beyond the clouds reaching high, Burj Azizi, a universe in itself. Branded labels to shop from. A 7-star hotel, penthouses and residences, a mesmerizing observation deck, and more to entertain yourself. This is the world's second tallest tower, Burj Azizi. Amazing on every level.
A U.S. judge has rejected a Justice Department request to unseal grand jury testimony from the case against Ghislaine Maxwell, the jailed accomplice of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Following a review, Manhattan Judge Engelmeyer said there were no special circumstances that justified the release of the transcripts.
This is another thorn in the side of the Trump administration as it attempts to disassociate the U.S. president from Mr. Epstein. President Trump has rejected reports that he was a longtime affiliate of Mr. Epstein.
That's despite documentation, including an old birthday card to Epstein, that suggests the two were friends who shared secrets. It's a story that has raised questions from many lawmakers and Americans, with some Republicans among those calling for transparency. Well, let's bring in Jennifer and Brett again. Jennifer, how problematic is this for the president? We know that many of his supporters, the MAGA base, are saying that they want more information and transparency on all of this.
Well, the problem for the administration is the hype that his appointees had prior to going into office. And after they first came into office, stating that they had the files, they released the files, they released the list, and then the air fell out the balloon, that there's nothing to see here. That's where the problem came on board. Now, the administration have to find a way to appease those, particularly on the MAGA base, and those that want to have some transparency of those that were impacted by Epstein as to what's really there. There are videos, there are tapes, there are pictures, and Ghislaine Maxwell in a secure prison, what did she share with the DOJ? What information does she have that she shared in her testimonies and information that could be presented to the public where it's not going to implicate innocent people that didn't have anything to do with the nefarious activities that Epstein had? That is the crux of the matter for the administration.
Jennifer, why do you think then the administration is reluctant to release the full files? Do you think it implicates people they don't want to be in the spotlight?
That's a possibility. Or it also could be that they have not scrubbed the files enough, such that innocent people that you mentioned in prelude that President Trump sent a birthday card to Epstein. Well, I've sent birthday cards to people that I'm not very well known to them. They're not intimate to me, but because it was a nice gesture to do, I did. So that in itself doesn't give an implication that anyone was involved with Epstein, and they need to scrub the files to remove those individuals from the list and or the files, and then produce what they can to the American public. So the speculation and the implication as to what people are pointing fingers to would just go away.
And Brett, do you think that the administration, the Justice Department specifically, has more legal routes or legal recourse to go to the courts and say, actually, we do want this unsealed?
Yes, and look, this administration has been very aggressive in pushing up even to the Supreme Court all of these lower court decisions. But politically, this becomes an even bigger problem for Trump and the Republicans, because the courts are essentially saying there's nothing to see here. So the onus then goes back onto the FBI, the Department of Justice, and let's not forget, Republicans on Capitol Hill were ready to mount their own hearings and investigation. All of this will just give more oxygen to the issue. And while, they're going to try and divert and distract attention, Trump is the only one who has all these photos, the video that was just up on the screen for folks at home. So his relationship is pretty well documented. And, despite the efforts to deny that he does drawings and that this birthday page was his, it all looks politically really bad, really messy, and it ain't getting better for Trump anytime soon.
Well, it's certainly a topic that continues to remain in the headlines, despite the number of other news stories that we've been discussing throughout the program. But it's one that there is renewed interest in, of course, hearing this news today from the U.S. judge rejecting this. But I want to thank our panel, Brett and Jennifer. I'm going to say goodbye to you now as I prepare for World News America, coming up next for our global viewers.
And Jennifer and Brett will be staying with us for UK audiences. Back in a moment.
have come a long way, and there really is something for everyone. For those who perhaps just want a gentle cycle through the vineyards, there are models like this. But we've come here to try out something a bit sleeker and a bit more extreme. Ooh.
This is the home of Canyon Bikes, a German firm based in Koblenz that has designed a new electric road bike. The Endurace OnFly travels up to 15 miles per hour if the rider engages the engine system, and it's lightweight and almost noiseless.
As road cyclists, we're very sort of focused on aesthetics, something that's very clean, very streamlined looking. It was a real challenge in the design process to get this bike looking as sleek as possible, and the end result is something that at first sight people have to look twice and realise that it's an e-bike.
The bike weighs less than 10 kilograms, therefore the frame must be made from a super lightweight but sturdy material.
So the frame is made of carbon fibre. Carbon fibre has performance advantages. You can create lighter frames, you can create stiffer frames as well. Also in terms of design as well, you can have more freedom because the surface of carbon fibre, you can mould it to any way you want essentially.
Dennis runs the test lab at Canyon. He's showing me a 3D scanner used to precisely measure the dimensions of bike frames.
This area we have our 3D measuring arm. There we can create very fast, very precise 3D models. As you can see on the screen, I'm scanning the C-tube and the top tube of the frame.
It's time to fit two more of the e-bike's most critical components.
A battery and the motor as well. First of all, they're fairly lightweight. The compactness of the core components these days allows us to create a very kind of svelte package.
Now to the production line, where engineers assemble the different bike parts.
But you're going to talk us through how you actually put an e-bike together.
Yeah. What you see here, the cable routing is already done, and our mechanic is now putting in the battery and fixing it with 2 screws with the right torque.
And here we have it, the e-bike's engine room. This hidden motor helps to propel riders uphill or wherever they need an extra push, while the battery offers a range of more than 60 miles, depending on the terrain and incline. There can be a big difference between the spec sheet and how a bike feels in practice, but before jumping on for a test ride, I want to find out more about e-bike safety.
No pedestrian should be frightened of an e-bike because the e-bike should obviously be on the roads and be, obeying traffic rules. 25 kilometers an hour is not that fast. It's 15 miles an hour. Most modern bikes, it's very easy to ride above that speed as well, so the support is actually cutting out. It's not like no one's going to buzz past you or doing like 30 miles an hour or anything like that.
So this is Canyon's latest offering, their first e-road bike. It's incredibly light at just 10 kilograms, and it doesn't actually look like an e-bike, but you can tell when you hit the hills.
With a price ranging from £4,000 to almost £9,000, it's not a bike for everyone. But riding it was a fun experience, especially when the background is this picturesque.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Donald Trump deploys the National Guard to Washington, D.C., pledging a crackdown as he makes unverified claims about the level of crime in the city.
Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it.
Also coming up, funerals are held for the 5 Al Jazeera journalists killed in an Israeli strike on their tent in Gaza City. And the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, tells the BBC European leaders are concerned Kyiv is being sidelined in planned talks between Presidents Trump and Putin in Alaska. Welcome to World News America. It's good to have you with us tonight. The U.S. National Guard says 800 soldiers are deploying to Washington, D.C. on President Trump's orders. The president has also stripped control of the D.C. Police Department from the local government, giving it to federal officials. Mr. Trump says it's part of a crackdown on crime and homelessness in the Capitol. At a White House news conference, he spoke of caravans of youth and, quote, bloodthirsty criminals on the streets, despite official data showing crime in D.C. has gone down.
We'll deploy officers across the district with an overwhelming presence. You'll have more police, and you'll be so happy because you'll be safe. When you walk down the street, you're going to see police or you're going to see FBI agents. We're going to have a lot of agents on the street. And you're going to have a lot of essentially military, and we will bring in the military if it's needed.
That announcement was well received by House Republican leadership, but faced widespread condemnation from human rights groups and Democratic leaders. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called it a distraction and proof that the president did have the authority to deploy the National Guard when the Capitol was attacked on January 6th. Mayor Muriel Bowser called it an intrusion on D.C.'s autonomy and renewed her push for D.C.'s statehood. Unlike the 50 states, Washington has limited independence from the federal government, with Congress holding extraordinary control over local matters. Human Rights Watch said in a statement, quote, the administration's move costs millions of dollars that could be spent on basic services like food and affordable housing, adding, as we have seen around the world, military takeover of local law enforcement is a harbinger of authoritarianism. BBC Verify has been looking into DC crime statistics for us, and BBC Verify's Jake Horton is with us in studio to tell us a bit more about this. Jake, thanks for looking into this for us. And what more has President Trump been saying about crime overall in Washington?
So in his press conference, he said crime in the Capitol was out of control, and the executive order that he signed, which allowed him to send those National Guard troops onto the streets of the Capitol, they reference violence in the city rising. But we've spoken to crime experts and dug into the data all day today, and all of those experts and the data back up that it's actually quite the opposite. Crime is dropping overall in the city. Violent crime last year was at the lowest point in 30 years. Now, in 2023, there was a slight uptick, but last year it dropped again. And so far this year, it's actually down 26% from that lowest point in 30 years. So it's consistently dropped over the last 3 decades. And in the press conference, Trump highlighted 2 particular elements of crime, types of crime. He talked about murders and he talked about carjackings. As you can hear, he made certain claims about these in this clip.
And the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever.
2023 was the highest rate probably ever. And we have a chart we can put up for you now which shows that's not the case. Although in 2023 they did tick up, like crime overall, and they were the highest in 20 years, but you could see that in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, they were higher than that rate in 2023. And much like the crime data overall, that trend ticked down again in 2024 and has continued in 2025. So it's not true that 2023 was the highest on record, and he's cherry-picking data there where he's just highlighting one year which did see an uptick, but overall that trend for murder rates has continued to drop. And it's the same with carjackings. This has been an element that Trump has highlighted several times over the last couple of weeks because there was an incident where a former DOJ staffer, a former member of the Department of Government Efficiency, allegedly had his car jacked and was attacked. So Trump has returned to that issue a few times, and he highlighted today in the press conference saying that carjackings had tripled over the last 3 years up until 2023. And again, it's a similar trend there. They did spike in 2023 and saw some significant rises overall, but they have dropped by more than 50% from that point to the current data in 2025. So all the data suggests that crime rates are actually dropping overall in DC, and it's currently at a pretty low rate historically.
Okay, really interesting to get that insight into the numbers. Jake Horton from BBC Verify, great to have you on. Thank you so much. And let's get some more reaction from here in Washington. I can speak to Phil Mendelson, chairman of the Washington, D.C. City Council. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Mr. Mendelson. I just want to first start with your reaction to the president's announcement and what he said was rampant crime and an emergency in this city.
Well, it's very troubling because it's untrue and it is damaging. It casts the city in the light of being a horrible place, unsafe, ugly, not beautiful, when in fact it's just the opposite. Ask any tourist, the city is beautiful. But just as you went over, crime is down. He, in his order, refers to a precipitous rise in violent crime. I'm quoting him. But just looking at the last 10 years, violent crime is down 43%. Now, last year, there were 3,469 violent crimes. Ask any one of those victims, and it's a horrible story. But when you look at the data, it is not precipitously rising. It's not rising at all. It's dropping. And this year, it's dropping in every category compared to last year. It's just a false story, and it is being used to justify this, what appears to be a takeover, although when one looks at the language of the order, it's actually not.
So, Mr. Mendelson, there are plenty of D.C. residents, as you know, who do have concerns about crime in the city. And I do want to ask you about some of the statistics that the White House itself has presented, saying there is a problem. They said, for example, as we were just discussing with our colleague, that carjackings increased 547% between 2018 and 2023. Back in 2024, that D.C. had the 4th highest homicide rate in the country. Have things gotten out of control or beyond D.C.'s control to address this crime?
Well, crime did go up 2 years ago. Crime went up in 2023, and he seems to be using 2023 figures. But even 2023 compared to 10 years ago, the numbers are lower. It's just not accurate.
Okay, and I do want to ask you about what the mayor said about all of this, because she was asked about President Trump's announcement here, and she said that it's unsettling and unprecedented, but she did seem to indicate that there was little that she could do, that the city council could do to counter the president here. Do you agree?
Well, the president speaks about a takeover, federalizing our police force, but the actual language is that he is using a federal law, our Home Rule Act, to ask of the mayor that our Metropolitan Police Department provide services to the federal government. I mean, that's a very different picture. And providing services, another way of looking at that is collaborating with federal partners, which actually we do all the time. So looking at the language of the order, there's not much to fight, even though we don't like it. And the rhetoric around it is horrible and inaccurate and damaging to the district.
So you're saying you don't think there is much that the mayor can do to challenge this?
Based on the order itself, my understanding is that our Attorney General is looking at legal options, but the president's order, again, not the rhetoric, not the press conference, but the order itself seems to hew closely to what our Home Rule Act provides. It's a temporary authority that the president can exercise to require the services of our police department for purposes.
And I do want to ask you about the unhoused population in Washington, something that the president also touched on. He wants encampments, quote unquote, quote, cleaned up. What do you think will then happen to the unhoused population here?
Well, it depends on what he means by cleaned up. And at its worst, it could be pretty inhumane. We do have a lot of encampments. Most of them are on federal property. And so it's completely appropriate that federal authorities who can act on federal property, our local police cannot. It's completely appropriate that the federal authorities would do more.
Okay, Mr. Mendelsohn, we'll leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us today on BBC News.
Sure, thank you.
Now on to some other news. Donald Trump says he will try to get some territory back for Ukraine during his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on Friday. But the U.S. president admitted there may need to be some swapping of land to end the war. That appears to be a non-starter for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, whose chief of staff spoke with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Monday. Andrei Yermak said Ukraine's priority is a just and lasting peace, which he said requires an unconditional ceasefire as a prerequisite for substantive negotiations. Now, earlier, President Zelensky put out a statement saying Putin is, quote, definitely not preparing for a ceasefire or an end to the war. European foreign ministers gathering in Brussels expressed concern that Ukraine has not been offered a seat at the upcoming Trump-Putin meeting. And our Ukraine correspondent James Waterhouse is in Brussels, where he's been following that meeting. He joins us now for more. James, give us a bit more detail on what the ministers had to say on this.
Well, I mean, as you can see behind me, Brussels isn't known for its political activity in August, but it's amazing what a last-minute bilateral meeting between the US and Russia will do. we've had a flurry of diplomacy here. We've seen a meeting, as you say, of defense ministers where they have announced further sanctions for Moscow. That is something you would expect. They have also, again, called for an unconditional ceasefire before any agreements can be made on how the war could end in Ukraine. But I tell you what, there's also resignation that they're not going to get last-minute invitations to Alaska. And there's also an anxiety over how Donald Trump will react to what is widely expected to be continued Russian demands. I spoke earlier to the European Union's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, who reiterated the need, as she saw it, for Ukraine's involvement.
Well, I hope that Vladimir Zelensky will be invited to the meeting, because it's clear that Putin wants a photo with the most influential people on earth, which is President Trump, and he wants the sanctions to be postponed. So this is what he wants, and he will probably get. Now, the question is, what is the success for United States in this meeting? And if President Zelensky would be part of this meeting, it would be a clear success also for United States, because it's clear that any deal to be implemented needs also Ukraine and Europe on board.
Now, President Trump has described this Alaskan meeting as a chance to feel Vladimir Putin out, to get a sense of what he's after. But the real fear here on the continent is that the subject of territorial concessions, land swaps, will be discussed. Donald Trump said it will come up. There'll be some good in his words and some bad. And what that means is far from clear. There are reports that Russia could be given entire Ukrainian regions, patches, huge swathes of territory that have been staunchly defended over the past 3.5 years. And the idea of swapping Ukrainian territory for Ukrainian territory, or giving it up for Volodymyr Zelensky, has been a non-starter with the backing of his European allies. The reason, they say, is that Russia's aggression should not be rewarded. You can't, that is the argument, you can't have Europe's eastern borders, and Ukraine's borders no less, being defined by a full-scale invasion, by a full-scale invasion that the West has struggled to contain.
And James, just quickly, is there a sense there in Brussels that the U.S. is hearing those concerns?
It's really hard to get a measure. I don't think they're being listened to yet. There is a virtual summit planned for Wednesday, organised by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, where they will sit down with Zelensky and with Trump. And you can be sure they will want to be consulted on America's vision for how this war can end. But we already know how keen, shall we say, the White House is by the prospect of direct talks with the Kremlin on American soil.
James Waterhouse reporting from Brussels tonight. Great to get your analysis. Thank you. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, who we mentioned, condemned a targeted Israeli strike that killed 6 journalists in Gaza. Her comments add to a growing chorus of international criticism, including from the United Nations, which condemned the attack as a grave breach of humanitarian law. Funeral processions were held in Gaza City earlier for the Al Jazeera journalists, including prominent reporter Anas al-Sharif, killed in the Israeli strike. The Israeli military alleged that the 28-year-old correspondent was the head of a Hamas cell. But the BBC understands that Mr. Sharif worked for a Hamas media team in Gaza before the current conflict. Al Jazeera strongly denies the IDF allegations and called the strike, quote, punishment for al-Sharif's extensive reporting from an area Israel does not want the rest of the world to see. Also killed in that attack in northern Gaza on Sunday was the Al Jazeera correspondent Mohammed Karige, cameraman Ibrahim Zahir, Mohammed Nufail and Mohammed Aliwa, and freelance reporter Mohammed Al-Khalidi. Israel has not said they were in any way connected to Hamas. Our Middle East correspondent John Donison sent this report.
More grief in Gaza City. After Israel's attack last night wiped out Al Jazeera's team there. The 5 journalists had been working in their office, a tent, when it was hit by a drone. In the light of day, you can see they didn't stand a chance. Shrapnel ripping through the canvas. And this was the target, 28-year-old reporter Anas al-Sharif, a familiar face on Al Jazeera for much of the war. Here, he's with his young daughter, trying to celebrate Eid earlier this year, in a rare moment of respite.
Anyone who tries to convey the truth is a legitimate target for Israel, to be killed in order to suppress their words and hide the truth.
Israel claims Mr. al-Sharif was the head of a Hamas terrorist cell, but only produced a few alleged Hamas spreadsheets with his name on as evidence. The BBC understands he worked as part of a Hamas media team before the war. Al Jazeera has denied he had any link with the group.
Is it worth responding to? Doesn't Israel claim that everyone that they don't like is Hamas? Don't we need to go thoroughly in what they provide as evidence? We haven't seen anyone.
More than 180 journalists have been killed by Israel in Gaza since the start of the war, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. From Jerusalem, I spoke to their CEO, who told me such numbers are unprecedented.
This is the deadliest conflict for journalists that the Committee to Protect Journalists has ever documented, and we've been doing this work for more than 3 decades. To put it into context, Israel has killed more journalists since the start of this war than were killed worldwide in the preceding 3 years. That gives you some sense of just how deadly this war has been for journalists.
This morning in Gaza, the latest to die were buried. There will be questions about Israel's justification for killing al-Sharif if he played a relatively minor non-combat role with Hamas several years ago. Also, as has been the issue throughout the war, there's the question of proportionality. Is it justified to kill 5 journalists when you are only targeting 1?
That report from John Donison, and he joins us now from Jerusalem for more. John, good to see you. How is Israel responding to the international criticism of the killing of these journalists?
Well, they're not saying much. They're sticking to that fairly thin evidence that they've presented. They certainly haven't presented any evidence that shows concretely that Anas al-Sharif was an active member of Hamas's military wing, as they say, during the war. And I think it's important to say that Al Jazeera is a highly respected news organization which has really led the way in terms of frontline reporting in Gaza throughout much of the war. Israel doesn't like them. They are banned in this country, and Israel has killed their journalists in Gaza and in the West Bank before. But what they've done here is they have wiped out their entire team in Gaza City just weeks, months before we're going to get this full-scale invasion and occupation of Gaza City by the Israeli military.
And John, what more is the Israeli government saying about those plans at this point?
Well, I was at a press conference with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. He was asked about the timing. He was pretty vague. He said it would happen speedily. It's being reported in the Israeli media that they're looking at starting the operation to conquer Gaza City in October. Before that, they're going to try and get more aid in and displace up to 1 million people further south to the so-called safe zones.
John Donison for us in Jerusalem. Thank you. Meanwhile, Australia is the latest country to announce it will recognize a Palestinian state in September. Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said the government received commitments from the Palestinian Authority, including to demilitarize, hold general elections, and continue to recognize Israel's right to exist. It comes as Gazan health officials say 69 people have been killed in the last 24 hours. The Gaza Health Ministry says another 5 people have died due to malnutrition, which it says takes the overall number of people dead since October 2023 due to a lack of food to 222. Let's take a look now at some other headlines. Aid workers in Darfur and Western Sudan say the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces have attacked a second refugee camp, killing at least 40 civilians. Reports say the RSF stormed Abu Shouk, opening fire inside homes and on the streets. The camp is situated west of El Fasher, the only city in Darfur still in government hands. The UN has declared famine conditions across the whole region after more than 2 years of civil war in Sudan. An explosion at a steel plant in Pennsylvania has killed at least 2 people and injured dozens of others. 1 person is unaccounted for and many have been trapped under the rubble at the U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works plant. Emergency workers have been working to free them. People living within a mile of the plant have been told to keep windows and doors shut after thick black smoke was seen rising from the site. And a U.S. judge has rejected a Justice Department request to unseal grand jury testimony from the case against Ghislaine Maxwell, the jailed accomplice of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Following a review, the judge ruled that the material would reveal nothing new. President Trump had promised to release Epstein-related files if reelected, but last month the Justice Department said an Epstein client list did not exist, reviving questions about the president's own relationship with Epstein. Now, Colombian senator and presidential hopeful Miguel Uribe has died 2 months after being shot at a political rally in Bogotá. The 39-year-old was hit by 3 bullets, 2 of them in the head and 1 in the leg at a campaign rally in June. 7 people are under arrest for the shooting, including the suspected gunman, a 15-year-old boy. Mr. Uribe's wife thanked her late husband for, quote, a life full of love and for being the best father for their children. Let's get more from our Colombia correspondent, Jose Carlos Cueto, who's joining us now. Jose, thank you very much for being with us. First of all, tell us a bit about the reactions you're seeing in Colombia and just how significant it is that Mr. Uribe has died.
Well, it is very significant because 35 years ago, that was the last time a presidential hopeful was killed in Colombia, in a way darker time than the one that we live today. Many reactions across the political spectrum have condemned the attack. The president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, reacted shortly after the news was confirmed in a long post on X. He first sent his condolences to Uribe Turbai's family, expressing that life is above any ideology. He then acknowledged that even though Colombia has seen a reduction in violence in recent decades, this tragedy happened under his government that promised to bring peace and more progression to Colombia. He finally pushed and instructed the authority to keep investigating the case and for the violence and vengeance to stop in Colombia.
Mr. Petro leads a left-wing government. I mean, what does all of this mean, do you think, for the country looking ahead to the next elections?
Well, one of the things that Petro has definitely brought to the country is another type of conversation. Security has always been a fundamental conversation for Colombians ahead of the elections. But in this time, before this happened and before a huge polarization was taking place in the country, Colombians were talking about other topics such as labor rights, social rights, health, for example. Now, what analysts are saying is that they're expecting security to be very central in the political campaigns for the next election. And what they are predicting as well, according to history, is that traditionally right-wing parties have been better capitalizing the security conversation in Colombia. It's very soon to say how can this affect the political speech and what can happen in the next few months, but definitely security will be, again, a central part of the political campaign ahead of the 2026 presidential elections in Colombia.
Jose, just quickly before we let you go, political violence had marred the 80s and 90s in Colombia. How are people seeing this? Are they worried that this could become a trend?
Well, I think it's early to say how worried this can be. This is very sad, tragic news, and definitely older generations will be remembering in these days those darker times of the past. But political violence in Colombia has been reduced over the last few years, as well as the homicide rates. So I think it's early to say that we're back in those times, but definitely this will be traumatic, especially for those older generations who live so closely to those darker times in the past.
Okay, really interesting reporting there. Jose Carlos Cueto, thank you so much for joining us tonight from Bogota. Okay, that's our program today, but don't forget, you can always get the very latest on bbc.com/news. You can see there that we have full coverage of the international condemnation of that Israeli attack that killed 5 Al Jazeera journalists. Those funerals, of course, held today in Gaza City. And we also have the latest coverage of our top story there. You'll see on the website Donald Trump announcing sending National Guard troops and federalizing DC police here in response to crime. Thank you for watching World News America, and stay with us.
Now on BBC News, comprehensive coverage of the day's important national and international news stories. Newsnight.
President Trump deploys the National Guard to Washington, D.C. to crack down on violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals and takes control of the D.C. police. Is this a power grab or a legitimate move to tackle crime in America's capital? And here, a Knight of the Realm and longtime advisor to the King is arrested for supporting the now banned Palestine Action, which the government says is a terrorist organisation. We'll talk to him live. Good evening. Welcome to Monday's Newsnight. Hello. In an unprecedented move, President Trump has announced he's taking control of the Washington, D.C. Police Department and deploying 800 National Guard troops to crack down on crime.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse.
Both FBI data and police data in D.C. shows a drop in violent crime in the capital in recent years. So why is Donald Trump doing this? Let's talk to Breitbart senior editor-at-large, Joel Pollak, and also Richard Stengel, former editor of Time magazine who worked in President Obama's State Department. Welcome, gentlemen, to both of you. Joel Pollak, violent crime in D.C. is going down. Why is President Trump doing this?
Well, going down, but from an unacceptably high level. The level of crime in Washington, D.C. has been a problem for a long time, as has the problem of homelessness and general squalor in the capital. And Trump's had enough of it, as have many residents. I think the context here is also the successful deployment of the National Guard to Los Angeles, where I made my home for many years, and where the National Guard was able to prevent the spread of rioting beyond the center of the city against the immigration and customs enforcement activities that were going on. So I think he feels confident that the National Guard can restore order and they can provide crucial support to local police who often don't have the support of the politicians that run these cities. And I think it's going to be positive for the city.
OK, you say they will help restore order. Violent crime is at a 30-year low in D.C. I've got some figures just from 2024 compared to 2025, January to August. Homicide down 12%. Sexual abuse crimes down 50%, assault with a dangerous weapon down 20%, robbery down 28%. Are they really needed to restore order to the streets?
You know, it was Byron York of the Washington Examiner who made the observation that Trump is aiming at a Washington, D.C. that has a very low level of crime, and the level of crime that some people have decided is acceptable is very, very high compared to the level of crime you'd experience in other cities. So when you say that there have been these drops, again, it's from an unacceptably high level. These aren't drops to levels that people feel safe about. These are drops from historic highs coming off now the pandemic and the policing crisis of Black Lives Matter. So yes, there have been some improvements. But what we're also seeing are these phenomena of these large-scale mobs attacking people, the disorder and chaos around that, social media posts of people delighting in the crimes that they're committing, and very little is done about it. There's also a reporting problem. You have people who have just decided it's not worth reporting the crimes that they've been victimized by. So I think Trump is bringing in the National Guard to provide a crucial backup, and the police union has actually supported it. So the people most involved in enforcing the law and dealing with crime have said this is a welcome, albeit temporary, intervention.
Richard Stengel, does that sound perfectly reasonable to you?
No, it doesn't sound perfectly reasonable to me. What's reasonable is that crime is too high in Washington, D.C., but the predicate for him bringing in the National Guard and for him taking over the D.C. police force is that there's an emergency. There's not an emergency. This is a technique that autocrats and authoritarians have used for 100 years to declare a false emergency, to federalize the police force. It happened in Germany in the 1930s, in Italy in the 1920s. If you're really concerned about violent crime, there are more books about how to reduce it than in my library behind me. New York City, where I grew up, has reduced violent crime to levels lower than when Donald Trump grew up in Queens. There's a lot better ways to do it than ask the federal government to do it. And by the way, the federal government is not good at reducing violent street crime. It can do a lot of things, but that's not one of them.
Joel Pollak, I saw you laughing at the comparison that Mr. Stengel was making. Why?
Well, because if I were to construct a caricature of a liberal commentator, I would have them say that Trump is Hitler every time they comment on anything. So you played perfectly to type there. I mean, the idea that Trump is a dictator because he brings in the National Guard under his legal democratic statutory authority to help with violent crime, which is something many residents would welcome, I think that's unfortunately par for the course. But you know, why does Trump have to be Hitler? Why can't he just be making a policy decision with which you disagree? He's got to go all the way to the Third Reich to find someone to criticize Trump for this. I mean, it's actually funny, you know. And I wouldn't poke fun at you, Richard, but you started your segment by laughing, and maybe that's appropriate. I mean, it's comical, really, to hear about this. You know, on this network, a couple weeks ago, we were told that
Mr. Pollak, let him respond.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I hope and pray you're right that it's a ridiculous comparison. But I mean, he's used the predicate of emergencies to create a system of tariffs that could well destroy the American economy. During his first term, he was looking for any excuse to federalize the National Guard. You know, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Yes, lots of us are concerned that Trump will turn America into an authoritarian society, that he will remove the rule of law. I hope to God I'm wrong. I hope to God that the American institutions will stand up for it. I would hope, too, that his interest is genuine. But if his interest is genuine in reducing crime, this certainly isn't the way to do it.
So the fact that he had the National Guard on the street in Los Angeles for several weeks and then withdrew them once the crisis was over, that doesn't figure into your analysis? I mean, we don't seem to have seen the Third Reich reemerge on the streets of LA. What we have seen is an end to the rioting. So wouldn't that factor into the way we look at what's happening in D.C.?
You know, I didn't realize this was a debate, but I'm happy to have one. I mean, what was happening in Los Angeles were demonstrations against violations of the rule of law, for the illegal picking up of immigrants, for the abuse of all the laws that the federal government shouldn't abuse. People were demonstrating. That's their right.